All right, and welcome everybody. I can see we have already a fair number of people who've logged in, so we are going to get started now. I am Arthur Novarina. I am the MD here in the EMEA region for Kochava. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Over the next hour or so, we're going to go into all things marketing mix modeling related. A couple of items before we get started. So this webinar is being recorded, no need to take notes. We're going to share the recording with you by tomorrow. Also, if you have some question, you can see at the top right, the Q&A text box, and feel free to submit any question here. We're going to tackle those questions during the webinar or towards the end of the webinar. And if we don't have time to tackle some of them, don't worry, we'll follow up with you over email after the webinar. Briefly about Kochava before we go on to the presentation for those of you who don't know us. We've been in the ads measurement space since 2011, one of the first MMPs out there, mobile measurement platform. But we do far more than just mobile nowadays. We are an omnichannel measurement solution, measuring any type of connected devices as well as offline media. And we are providing solution both for the advertiser side as well as the publisher side. When it comes to MMM specifically, I think we all agree that there's been a renewed interest for MMM over the last few months and over the last year or so. And we acknowledge that at Kochava. We understand that there is a need due to the change in the ad tech industry and the change in the privacy landscape for servicing the space with a next generation MMM solution. A solution that can address the needs for data scientists as well as marketing analytics team, but also that can provide a solution that is actionable and essentially that makes MMM more accessible for UA teams. And that being said, about a year ago, we completed the acquisition of Machine Advertising and their MMM solution that they've been developing over the last 4 years. This solution is called AIM. AIM stands for Always on Incremental Measurement. And that being said, I'm happy to welcome as well onto this call Gary and Rob. Gary is a founder of Machine Advertising and is now the general manager for AIM here at Kochava. And Rob is also coming from Machine Advertising and is head of data science for AIM at Kochava.
Great, thanks Arthur, and welcome everyone. Good to see so many people online.
All right, super. Gary, if you don't mind sharing your screen,
Yes.
So we can get started.
Absolutely.
All right, super. So maybe let's go right into it and let's go onto the next slide. Gary, we do hear a lot about different definition for what MMM is and how it differs from last touch attribution. So maybe as a start, can you give us a bit more information about what is marketing mix modeling?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's obviously it's one of the most frequently asked questions that we get asked, and I always like to take a step back and ask the question of the person who's asking that question is if they truly understand what touch attribution is, and specifically last touch attribution, which is the most common form of attribution, because it's quite commonly misunderstood. And also, if you write down on a bit of paper what MMM does and what last touch attribution does, they can seem very similar to one another. And what I mean by that is touch attribution simply tells you the last touch point that the user was before the conversion happened or the sale, whatever it is that you're tracking as the marketer. Whereas MMM, marketing mix modeling, it analyzes the different influence of all of your media channels on that end sale. And those two things sound quite similar, but one's essentially measuring incremental influence on sales and the other is measuring the last touch point. And the easiest way to explain this which seems to always go down quite well when we present it, is through a movie theatre analogy. So if you think about when you go to the movie theatre to see the latest film, there's always a poster for the film that you're about to see next to the door of the screen that you're about to go into. Now, in last touch attribution world, 100% of the credit would go to that movie theatre poster. But actually what's driven you to go and see that film at that particular time is an influence of media over the past few weeks and maybe even months as well. And that media mix, or that marketing mix, is made up of digital display, social, TV, out of home, all sorts of different things. And what MMM does is it measures the influence of each one of these different media channels on you going to the movie theatre to see that film. And more importantly, it's able to give you a precise measurement on the influence that they had on driving the sale. So if we bring this back to a more sort of real life scenario that we can all relate to, if you think about an example of user acquisition in the app space, if I were to all of a sudden get the urge to download the new Nike shopping app, my user journey would be pretty simple. I'd open up the app store on my phone, I would type into the search bar Nike, and if the first result that appeared at the top of the results was the thing that I wanted, the Nike shopping app, then I would click the button to download it, and 100% of the credit would go to Apple search ads. So effectively, Apple search ads have become the movie theatre poster in this example here. What's really happened in this example is that the Nike performance marketing team likely had a marketing mix which looked maybe something like this. And their last touch attribution is attributed in an allocation like this. So a sort of distribution of attribution, which probably looks very familiar to a lot of our audience. So a lot of the credit is going to Apple search ads. A lot of the credit is going to Google, because these are quite often the last touch points. What MMM does is it actually measures the influence of your marketing mix. So it's able to measure the influence that maybe an ad network or a media channel had earlier on in the user journey that really drove to that acquisition. So in this case here, even though this is mocked up data, this looks very familiar to us. This is the type of sort of distribution that we see every day. A platform like Apple Search Ads isn't as influential, as incremental as maybe it appears in last touch data. And actually a platform like Facebook or Liftoff or Unity in these examples have more influence on that end sale. So the question is, what can you do with this data? How can you put this into action? Well, it's giving you new information that maybe you didn't have before. So the MMM model that's been built for your brand is able to feed you this information. And with that, all of a sudden, as a media buyer, as a performance marketeer, you've now got some levers that maybe you didn't have before. Your decision-making process has been enriched. So it means you can start to decrease spend on channels that didn't have as much influence as originally thought, and increase it where there's more influence than originally thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. I guess this is just a graphical representation. But what exactly do you do with that information? Because if we look at the one at the bottom, one could believe that the solution will tell you to essentially reduce your spend by 80% on the channel and then increase it by 30% on another channel. So the question is that realistic? And also, how does the model then get into that type of recommendation?
Rob, I'll let you answer that second part from a more technical point of view.
Yeah, sure. So what's happening fundamentally here is, and I'm taking a simplistic view on this, but ultimately we are looking at the correlation between spend or impressions and sales. So whenever those two things match up, we will find, in effect, the models will find that particular source is more influential. There's a whole load of complexity and sophistication beyond that, but that's the fundamental thing. We're looking for correlation. So in terms of how we actually make a recommendation, we look at the cost curves, the point of diminishing returns. So each one of these that you're looking at here is in fact a cost curve. So what you're looking at is really a single point in time or an average. A cost curve will cover all costs, and what in effect we do in the background is we overlay all of those cost curves, and we use something called an evolutionary optimizer, and we look at where the best possible place to spend that money based on the current budget. We can put a whole load of different rules in there, but that's fundamentally how we come up with the recommendations.
Okay, great. Well, that's a good lead into the next slide actually, which is talking about cost curves. So as Rob was saying, there's a lot that goes into this type of measurement. Obviously, this is a very simple sort of graphical representation. It's not quite as simple as removing your spend from Apple search ads. So in this example here, it's about sort of 75%, and placing that maybe on somewhere like Liftoff. And the reason for that is because of cost curves, which we just mentioned. So another sort of core element of MMM is understanding the cost curves of each one of your media channels. So the cost curve will show you where your current spend is, where you can go as an advertiser before efficiency is reduced within your spend, and where you shouldn't really be going at all. So I'll give you an example here. So in scenario A, the advertiser is a current spend of about $1,600 a day. So the daily ad spend along the horizontal axis at the bottom is about $1,600 a day, and then you've got the acquisitions on the vertical axis, which are currently at about $59 a day. So that's coming in at about $28 for this client. In a good MMM system, you should see this data, and more importantly, in a good MMM system, it will be able to show you where you can go, as long as you're comfortable with, in this example, the cost per acquisition. It could also show you on a cost curve your ROAS, your installs, your 7-day revenue, so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be CPA. I'm just using that as an example now. But in scenario B, it's showing the client, it's enriching their data, and it's enriching their strategy to show them, actually, if you're comfortable with a $33 cost per acquisition, you can spend up to about $3,700 a day and achieve about 130 acquisitions for that cost on Liftoff in this example. Now, more importantly, is that it shows you where not to go. Effectively here, point B is the point of diminishing returns. That's the optimal spend. That's the point where you shouldn't really spend anymore. And the reason for that is because of the bend in the curve, of the cost curve here. So it's showing the client, if you do spend more, so $6,700 in this case, you're only going to actually achieve an additional 4 acquisitions a day, which brings your cost per acquisition up to about $57. Now, without this information, you may be at point B or A or somewhere in between and decide to double your budget or extend your budget further at least. And that can have a massive impact on performance. So that's the cost curves there. I'll move forward onto the next slide. So
just a quick one, Gary, on that one. Thanks.
Yeah.
I assume then, based on what you've said, that a good MMM solution has a real-time and dynamic element into it, versus certain solutions that are a bit more static, right? So you can move from A to B to C, and an MMM solution has to empower with this insight.
Yeah, sure. Rob, I'll let you come in there with a technical explanation for that.
Well, these cost curves don't really mean a great deal on their own. So let's say, for example, you're at point C and you've got one network, then you may think, oh, well, I'm spending too much money, let's reduce it. But it's never that simple. And this is what people do instinctively when they're chasing the CPA down at campaign levels. You're optimizing your CPA. And really, this is what the optimizer does. It takes multiple cost curves in multiple countries, and you end up with lots of cost curves all overlapping. And it's that which determines the optimum budget. So looking at a single cost curve, it's very rich with information, but it doesn't tell you the actual optimum budget allocation until you've got all of the others on top of that. Now, in terms of the dynamic nature of a system, a good system will basically provide advice. You can follow that advice, and as you follow that advice over the coming days, all of that new information should be used to update the models. And what you have is a continually learning system. So it's, what you have is an attribution model that not only provides you with all of the attribution data that you would need on a day-to-day basis, but also one that adjusts to market dynamics, weather, and so on. And it will provide you with the most up-to-date advice that it possibly can. So yeah, a good MMM system will consume advice as often as possible and provide you with updated information and advice.
Great, thanks, Rob. And again, it sort of brings us on to the sort of closing part of this section, which is, MMM is the sum of all parts, and it's a bit like when you go to buy a new car. It's not just about the individual parts of the car, but it's about the sort of entire machine, the perfectly assembled machine. It's been designed by experts, crafted by engineers, and so on. And as with an MMM solution or a good MMM product and model, it uses sophisticated data science that integrates lots and lots of different elements into your model. So as Rob was just saying, it's not just about measuring the incremental benefits. It's not just about measuring the cost curves. It's also about everything. It's the sum of all parts. So it's things like understanding. So a good MMM model will understand your offline media, the seasonality of your sales, the PR that you're running, the holidays of the geo, so the national holidays of the geo that's been modeled, and so on and so forth. So it's coming together in all of these different parts to provide you a sort of a very useful product that gives you tailored insights specifically for your business that you can execute in market.
I see, Gary, on your slide here some type of offline media being listed out of home, for example. So is it also the type of media that an MMM solution takes into account for providing recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the massive advantages of MMM over touch attribution is the fact that it does consider all influences. Now, of course, the devil's in the detail in terms of the model needs to have that data in order to be able to measure it. So it's not just as simple as saying, hey, we did some out of home at some point, can it measure that? The answer is yes, but we need to have the data. And that data can be really straightforward. At a very high level, it's just simply the dates from when you did that out of home, start date to the end date. And then we would just need to inject that into the model. And if there was a lift in sales, an impact on sales, the model will attribute it to your out of home. But it also takes into consideration other things as well. So weather impacts quite often have an impact on all sorts of businesses, things like sporting events and so on. So when we're modeling a new client in their specific geo that they want modeled, we will work with the client to understand, are there any nuances that are specific to your business that have an impact on sales? And then we will use our data library to inject those signals. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning that's not on here, but it's definitely relevant, is things like ASO activity can be measured within the model as well. So any impact that's happening on the app stores with your app is able to understand those type of signals as well, good ratings, bad ratings, promotions, and so on. So I'll move on to how to get started with MMM. Obviously it's the sort of next most important things. First, understanding, getting your head around what MMM is, and then understanding how to get on with it and how to build the model. So the model building, certainly our model building, has 4 core elements to it. So firstly, it's your KPIs. So your KPIs will be whatever your specific KPIs are. The ones that are up on the screen here are just an example, and we're using this for an app client. So typically that would be an install, a first-time purchase, number of revenue events, and so on and so forth. We build a model for each one of those KPIs. And then those models are put into what we call an ensemble model. So they're continually informing each other about what's happening in the market, if it's accurate, if it's not, and so on. So a good example of this is quite often within an attribution platform, you may see some data that shows that you've got more first-time purchases from a network than you have installs. And that's impossible. That's an impossible event to happen. So therefore, the ensemble model will inform each other that that's not possible. Scrap that incorrect model and build another one. So it's always updated to produce the most robust model. The second element is the media. So it's pretty straightforward. What media do you want the model to consider when we're building the model? So Google, Apple, Facebook, and so on. In here, we would include the out of home, any influencer marketing, and so on and so forth. Next is the geo. So it's quite simple. Which geo do you want us to model? And which geo do you want model? Typically, it's done at a country level. We can group countries together, depending on the sort of different user case. It's not always recommended to do that, but we can do it. So it'd be done at country level. And then there's the platform. So iOS, Android, web, connected TV, and whatever else that I can't think of at the moment. But we can model any sort of sales platform wherever you get them for. So you can actually model physical sales as well if the data is available. Also, so if you were going to build a model for, let's say, France on iOS, the data that's required would look something like this. So an MMM model doesn't use any attribution data. So if you're using Kochava or Adjust or AppsFlyer and so on, it wouldn't use any of that data. It doesn't consider any of the attribution that's happened before. What it looks at is what we call market level aggregated data. So it's privacy first data, it's not user level. Okay, so in this case, we would look for your French iOS total amount of installs, total amount of first purchases, total amount of revenue. And then on the media spend side, we would require your France iOS media spend by platform. In order to build the model, we require at least 1 year's worth of data and at least 3 months worth of ad spend data. It is a data science product, so the more data that we can get hold of, or any model, this would be the case for, the better. So if you've got 3-4 years worth of data, we will happily take it. And it would be the same for any model that you're building. If you've only got 1 year's worth of data, that will be good enough. Typically, a good system would collect this via an API. So if we're doing this for an install client, we would connect via the MMP API and then the cost API, wherever that may be. So quite often, the cost data isn't with the attribution platform. Sometimes it is, of course, but quite often it isn't. And the client is holding that within their data management system, their internal data management system. So we would collect it from there. And then there's a real-time data feed established as well. So that means that we can update the model every day. So the model's constantly collecting data from the market, from your market, and updating its models. Now, the third element is what we call external factors. So we would inject external factors which are relevant to your brand. Now, there's always a few which are sort of standard. So weather, holidays, sporting events quite often affect most brands. So anything that has an impact on your KPIs, we would work with the client to understand those nuances. So it could literally be anything.
Gary, this reminds me an interesting example that we had a couple of weeks ago with one of our customers, launch a ride-sharing application, and they wanted to input some additional external factors to improve the accuracy of the model. Can you share a bit more with the audience?
Yeah, exactly. So as you said, it's a large ride-sharing business in North America, and we injected the Taylor Swift tour dates into their model, and it had quite a big impact on their model. So it improved their model accuracy by 5%, which is quite a big leap forward. Now, what that means is that our team injected the signal for Taylor Swift tour dates, so where she was in Philadelphia, Texas, Florida, and so on and so forth. And it also understood the capacity of those stadiums as well, and arenas. So it could see a lift in the sales, in the first time purchases and so on from that data, and therefore it attributed from the organic part, so from the sort of the black box of organics, it took some of the sales from the organic part and attributed it towards Taylor Swift. Now, it would do that with any external factors, where it sees that correlation that Rob was talking about earlier on. So if there's a correlation between hot weather and cold weather, it's also going to do that as well. So it's going to attribute it to those external factors, like Taylor Swift, like national holidays and so on. So anything like that we can understand from your business, we can put that into the model, and the model will then attribute it to that event. Now, the output of this is insights. Our platform is called AIM, so the AIM insights that you get would be at network level. at publisher level and at campaign level. So you're getting MMM insights at this level, which means that you're able to strategically adjust your investment across this different hierarchy of levels. Typically, in most cases with our clients, they're adjusting at a campaign level. So they're using the information that's the output of their model to adjust their campaign investment and use that in the next few weeks or months and so on. It's worth mentioning that this whole process would typically, for us, and I'm assuming it would be the same for other platforms as well, should take about three weeks, okay? And the client involvement in this is typically on average about 1.5 days. Okay, so it's very minimal, and that's a few hours here, a few hours there, and that's really just giving us access to the data. So giving us access to those APIs or maybe a batch file with the historical data. It's also worth pointing out that with an MMM solution and building a model, there's no SDK that's required. So there's no technical overhead and technical resources that's used for this. And there's no campaign disruption. So there's no stopping or starting campaigns for distribution of tags, whatever else. It runs in parallel with whatever else that you're doing.
Right, so that's quite interesting because I think we all know here, and you imagine as well, that it can be quite complicated sometimes to get resources from tech team for implementing new tools. So here, just to confirm, you're saying there is no tech implementation required.
No, none at all. Typically, it'd be like a market analyst or a marketing analyst or a sort of data scientist that would sort of point us in the direction of where the data is.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. We already have quite a few questions.
Yep.
Do you mind if we take a few minutes to answer those questions, some of them, right? Okay. Let me start maybe with the first one from Maria. Showing the question here. Maria is asking, what about the influence of non-paid channels, PR activities, store featuring, competitive landscape? I know you've mentioned a bit of that. Do you mind explaining again if we can ingest all this data into an MMM model? I think that's probably the right slide to talk about it.
Yeah, I'll let Rob chip in with that, the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is that this is precisely what MMM is really very good at, irrespective of what type of signal or data, whether it's cost data, impression data, even click data for things like emails. Just the numbers, we can ingest all of that. It could be things like I mentioned before, the weather near population centers. It can be ratings, app store ratings, or as Gary said, offers. All of this stuff really just helps enhance the accuracy, the attribution. And I think possibly where previously Last Touch has attributed influence to some of the app stores. In fact, maybe that influence should have been going to the fact that it was Christmas or Black Friday or things like that. So as long as you've got this data in the model, then you will just get better accuracy on your paid channels, as well as insight into where the actual sort of natural demand, market demand is coming from. But yeah, all of that can be added relatively simply.
All right, brilliant. Thanks, Rob. Another question I'm going to share from Maria. That was actually the first one. How would you suggest to verify the results of MMM versus what your regular MMP shows?
Rob?
Do you want me to say that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the first one is making sure that these tools are actually they come with recommendations, or they've had third parties analyze their methodologies, and they have good record in the market. Where I think things can go awry is, there's a lot of data scientists on their own or with a small group of people who can make fast progress quickly. You can get to sort of 80%, maybe a bit better, 90% of the way there. But you quickly start hitting resource constraints, infrastructure, huge training, cloud training, sort of DaaS clusters, and all these kinds of things. And this is where a commercial MMM solution really starts sort of moving away. But how do you to answer the question directly? The same question can be asked for any other tool that you might go out and purchase. Really, you just have to do your homework and make sure that what you're buying isn't a black box, and that there has been third parties actually involved and validating those solutions. There's no easy answer, but certainly third-party validation is a good place to start.
I can give a quick sort of example of what we've experienced. So a good way to validate the results is to look at your raw data. So if we were, for example, modeling France in the example up here, we look at, or the model looks at, total numbers, and that's something that can be quantified by the client. So let's just stick to installs. It's not the perfect metric, installs, to measure, but if we were looking at improving the number of installs for a client in France, then what you could look at is the total number of installs in France, not what's been attributed by Adjust or Kochava or AppsFlyer, which attribution platform it is that you're using. It's your total number of installs or first-time purchases, or your total CPA for that region. That really serves as your source of truth. So after using the MMM model, have you seen an increase in the metric that you're interested in quantifying in terms of the total metric? So if you're interested in decreasing your CPA, has there been a decrease in your total CPA for France on iOS, for example? So that would be one way to quantify it.
Thanks, Gary. Maybe let's take one more question at this stage. There are other questions coming, but maybe we can answer this one now. It's from Yuri. So Yuri is asking, UA Manager needs tool to predict revenue on the campaign, sub-campaign levels, but MMM, as you suggest, is a reattribution model on the just channel level. How we could combine MMM with UA Manager needs?
Yeah.
Can you clarify what we do, or what MMM does? Is at the channel level, or does it go deeper than this?
Well, our solution does. So our solution goes down to the network level. So if we use the example on the screen here, so you would have the insights for France on iOS at the network level. So that would be Google, for example, and then you'd have the same insights at the publisher level. So if we stick to Google, that would be Google publishers, YouTube, the Play Store, search, display, so on. And then you would have it at campaign level as well. So we have built a system specifically for user acquisition. So it answers those questions. So you would be able to use it at that level. Now, a caveat would be that obviously there can be hundreds of campaigns on a platform like Google. So really depending on the volume of a specific campaign, if it's got very low volume, low spend, low results, then the system should signal the sort of confidence level in that data. The other sort of end of that spectrum is, of course, campaigns can have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on them daily. So the confidence would be very high in the data that you're seeing there. So the quick answer is yes, it does go down to campaign level.
All right, thanks, Gary. There are a few more questions, but maybe I think some of the next slide will answer some of those questions, so we can move on to the next slide.
Okay.
That will take those questions after. I'm also going to launch a quick poll. I think we have a lot of information already, so feel free to answer it, and we're going to share the result at the end of the meeting. But do you plan on using MMM within the next 6 months based on your learning in these first 40 minutes? The poll is open.
Okay, shall I carry on, Arthur?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we've kind of touched on this slightly, but let's get into a bit deeper. There are different types of MMM solutions that clients will consider, and at a very high level, there's 3 different types. So there's a consultative solution. So that's hiring a third party to build the models for you. So these are this is a manual approach. So it'd be a team of data scientists and analysts, and they would be performing a point-in-time test to build a model. The downside to this is that it can be expensive, and the results are what we would class as static. So the team, the consultants, or an agency would use historical data to build a model, historical data only, to build a model, and then go away for a few weeks, maybe even months, and then give you the results, and that would come to you as a report. Now the report would be very insightful, but it could already be out of date because the batched historical data was from 3-4 months ago, and the time it's taken to build that model. So therefore, you're making decisions on static data. The point of MMM is to inform your decision-making process going forward. So it can be slow and it can be expensive. The second solution is an in-house one. So typically we would see clients use an open source model. So maybe something like Meta's Robin or the Google model. Again, it would be point in time, what we would call a point in time, so using historical data and not updating itself at a regular cadence anyway. It does require data scientists to build this model, and again, it gives you static results. So like the first solution, the consultative solution, this is just the in-house solution, except it's using up your resource that you have in-house if you have that resource. And then the third solution is a SaaS solution. So this is the new technologies that we have in the market today, similar to AIM. So these solutions should be providing you with dynamic models that auto update every day, or very regularly. It doesn't have to be every day, but it would be doing a regular cadence. It gives you actionable data. So it's data that can be executed by a performance marketing team. And so it's very easy to translate and put into action. It's low resources required as well. So as we saw on the previous slide, it's very little involvement from the client. The system's built and is being used in the market by a number of clients, and it's cost effective. Typically a SaaS solution would be a tenth of what a consultative solution, or even an in-house solution once you've added up the sort of time spent on it. So it's much more cost effective for clients to use. The other problem is with these traditional formats, as well as Rob touched on it before, is that you're at risk as a business, that what you're building taking months or even a year or so to build, is already out of date. So it's been built. It maybe give you some insightful knowledge, but the technology's moved on. Whereas a SaaS solution, which is servicing dozens and dozens of clients and always being updated with the latest technology and supported from a large team, is always going to have the latest features and so on. So there's risks associated with the traditional formats. We've seen it with other technologies. I've been around app marketing for many years, and I remember 10, 12 years ago when companies used to try and build their own attribution platforms as well, or attribution systems. Lots of them tried, but now everyone just uses the big 4 or 5 in the market. So it's the same with MMM. It's the same process that we're going to go through. Was there a question there, Arthur? Sorry, I heard a noise.
No, I mean, obviously, I think you've covered the risk factors and the benefits of each of those solutions. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on, things to consider when you're looking in the market, when you're evaluating an MMM solution. The first one, which we regularly come across, is how often does your model update, or how often does the system update? Let's say whether you're building it yourself, using a consultant, using a SaaS platform or a SaaS product. The question you should ask is, well, how often does the model get updated? And that graphic representation there is meant to be the difference between a sort of a paper map and a GPS system on your phone, and that's how you'd compare them. The issue that you have with a manual process, the traditional format, is it's a bit like using an old paper map. You've pinpointed where you want to go on the journey, and then you've set off, but that's it. Once you're on the road, you're going from point A to B. Whether there's been a traffic jam on the way, or whether there's been road closures, or whatever it may be, you won't know, because your data that you're using, the map, is telling you to go from A to B, and it's based on historical data. Whereas a model that updates regularly is more like the GPS system. So if those things happen on your journey, the road closures, the traffic jams, it's going to give you course corrections along the way to keep you moving, to keep you going in the direction, so that you can get to your end destination in the most efficient way possible. The next consideration is around, is it user-friendly with actionable insights? So one of the things that we identified early on when we were developing our system, AIM, about 3.5 years ago now, was the fact that traditional MMM was giving fantastic insights to clients if you were a market analyst or data scientist. So it was very insightful. Unfortunately for the people on the ground, the media buyers, the performance marketeers, quite often these insights couldn't be actionable. So you need to make sure that the system that you're using is talking to you in the language that you understand and is giving you data that can be actioned. So it's giving you insightful data, potentially data that should feel familiar to you, along the KPIs, giving you metrics for the KPIs that you want to see, things like installs, first-time registrations, ROAS, so on and so forth. It should be feeding that data to you so that you can make those strategical moves with this new insight. And then lastly is it adaptable to various data inputs and your workflow as well? Now, we've covered off a couple of times now during this presentation the different types of data that can go into a model, an MMM model. And we quite often, as we have been on this webinar, we've been asked, well, what other data can go in there as well? So just make sure when you're selecting an MMM tool or model or service, whatever it is that you want to use, what's the data inputs that can go into this model? And the easy answer is it should be all of them, really. So we've already had the question around PR and offline media and so on. A model should be able to ingest that data. If it can't, it's probably not going to add much value. And then there's also external factors, weather, sporting events, Taylor Swift, for example. It should be able to take into account those types of data. I think that's it at the end.
Yeah, actually, while we're on this slide, we got a initial question. So we got this question with Alfonso. It's probably the right time to ask it. Alfonso is asking if OMMM solution is also able to account for longer-term advertising effects, like additional sales effects coming from brand equity building, for instance. How would you answer this? Maybe that's for you, Rob.
Yeah.
Sure. So the answer is yes, and we have something for those familiar with MMM solutions, something called ad stock, where you have getting technical, you have a decay rate and basically like what you would call an attribution window. So for digital advertising, search stores and such like, that ad stock is very quick. So you've got a very high decay rate. The effect of it wears off quickly, and you've got a small window. An example being that most of the time nowadays, when you're using Last Touch, you're looking at a 7-day, maximum 28-day look back window. But really, I think most people use a 7-day certainly for impressions. So where does that take us as far as longer term advertising effects are concerned? So branding, out of home, TV adverts, these all have a much larger look back window, so a larger attribution window. So we open that window up because we know that these phenomena exist. And then the system goes off and it calculates, the models calculate the decay rates, and then you come back. And the model then basically works out, and you can see it where it shows, okay, you've got an ad stock that decays very quickly on Google because digital advertising, and there's a lot of the cinema effect, the movie effect. The second thing for branding, typically what we see is a smaller decay effect. So the curve takes a much longer time to tail off. I may have missed what I'm actually talking about in terms of that curve, but as far as branding campaigns are concerned, really it's what that curve does is it spreads that spending out, and really that's not really the underlying phenomenon here. What's happening is you've paid for some, I don't know, posters outside. People start seeing them. There's two things. First of all, those posters are there for a while. So again, that decay effect is spread out. And secondly, when people see them, they remember them. And again, there's a sort of facet here of like human memory, and that memory lasts for a while. So that fundamentally is how we take that into account. We use ad stock, and when you actually see the models, you can actually see branding campaigns, TV campaigns. Typically, the models say, yeah, actually the decay factor here is much smaller. It's taking longer, and this is just the model working that stuff out. So when you see it, it makes sense.
Right. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to share another question from Yuri. It's again related to data input. Let me share that here. So Yuri is asking what minimum percentage of budget we need to spend on a new channel for MMM goals. I guess for MMM to be able to work. Is there a right answer to this?
So there is no right or wrong answer, and as always, it always depends. It depends on how much you're spending relative to other campaigns. It depends on the performance of that particular channel or source. It depends on a lot. There is never a hard rule that says you need to have 3 months worth of data. Now, taking a lot of this into account, I believe actually that even only after a few weeks worth of data, our system is actually able to give you useful information. And that information could be, yes, we think there's something here. We think you should continue increasing that spend or continue investing in this channel. Equally, if it finds absolutely nothing, which is also an interesting fact, then it's basically hinting at the fact that maybe you're not really getting anything from that. It doesn't take 3 months. 3 months worth of data is good, and more data is always better. But yeah, there is no sort of line that says this is how much you need to have.
Great, thanks, Rob. Actually, another question isn't from me. I can see that Yuri is from the gaming vertical, and also related to data input and gaming vertical. We hear a lot of people in that space asking us if, for example, we can input live ops data. There is a belief in that vertical that live ops data should have a pretty significant impact on MMM. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's we can definitely ingest that data into the platform. As you know, the sort of common answer here, as I guess we're getting across, is all data is good for the model, and if there's something that it will pick up on and recognize a benefit, it will show in the data. And if it doesn't, then there's no benefit to that data, or there's not enough of the data. But certainly with something like live ops data for a game, we would expect to see some kind of output in the model for that.
Just one thing from my side, even apps that don't use live ops, it's beneficial to inform a model of when you've got a new version of the app coming out, because they can have, as you'd expect, significant impacts on in-app payments, revenue, and that kind of stuff. And so for even companies that don't use live ops, update when the apps are updated is again useful information and can inform development.
All right.
It's probably worth mentioning, Arthur, as well, just quickly before we finish here, is that a lot of people are asking about the data that can be input into the model, and so that is one of the great strengths of MMM, is that you can input that. And it's one of the weaknesses of touch attribution, is that it just doesn't consider any of those things and doesn't consider seasonality and holidays and whatever else. But it's also worth mentioning that to start with MMM, it's best to start walking before you can run. And it's so therefore don't make it into this huge project where we can put in that data and this data and so on and so forth. We've seen really good effects straight away from just building the model off the historical KPIs and the ad spend data from their digital channels, because 90% of our clients, and I'm sure probably the audience here, 90% of their marketing investment is actually going on digital channels. We will then work with the client to, over the next weeks and months, to understand their business more around, the live ops data or the Taylor Swift. The Taylor Swift example that we give earlier, that's after working with the client for a few months, so sort of understanding the nuances, so how we can tune that model even more to get even more insight into what they're doing. But we can prove the concept of MMM pretty early on, quite fast.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Rob. I think we're right on time. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. We will share the recording with you tomorrow. Last quick note on the poll. What's interesting is no one answered no to do you plan on using an MMM solution in the next 6 months. So that's good. 40% said yes, we plan on using an MMM solution, and then there is still a fair 60% that is undecided. So obviously, if you have any further question and you want to learn more about MMM, feel free to reach out to us. You have the link to the platform in case you want to book a meeting. Otherwise, you can simply answer the email that we're going to send to you tomorrow. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.